Hey, hold on. Let me make me big so we can meet each other. I'm Connor. I'm one of the people who's contributing to building Option. And I figured that I would just read this grant to you instead of asking you to go and read it. Because if you're anything like me, listening to something is a lot more fun than reading it. And so I think what I'll do is as I read this, I'll also just give you a little bit of commentary on what I was thinking. Um, so, uh, uh, let's go ahead and jump over here to the GitHub version because I think this is just a little easier on the eyes. And I'll go get a glass of water so that I can do this without losing my voice. One sec. Okay, I got my water. So we are ready to go. Let's start from the top. So, Option is the fruit of 7 years of work to design an economic system that can price externalities. If you're not familiar with externalities, this doc eventually talks about what they are. Funding from this grant will be used to employ a research lab in characterizing the behavior of Option via direct proof and by simulation. Direct proof is this person who is doing the work is a mathematician and game theorist, and they're also a computer scientist. So they'll be doing a little bit of both of those kinds of ways to find out how the system works in practice. Really important to do this sort of simulation and proof before you launch a system into the world, because otherwise you'll have Terra Luna experiences. If you're not familiar with that, it's when a cryptocurrency basically had well, maybe some fraud, but also just uh, a bad design that was exploitable and therefore was exploited because billions of dollars were on the line. In particular, this research lab will focus on the subproblem of judicial selection. We'll talk about that too. If you're interested in this subject, you might like to support Digital Gaia's grant. I'm also a team member over there. Digital Gaia is working on another credible way to price externalities, just like this does, starting with climate externalities. And we need as many people working on this kind of problem as possible. Okay, so by the way, this is what Digital Gaia's grant page looks like. So go give them some love. Okay, Option. Option is a prediction market for governance. Sometimes I also describe this as a system of incentives so that it's only profitable for companies to do good. It's both of those things, but the framing here is that communities that use Option enjoy an environment where it's profitable for companies to do good, or I'm sorry, to do what's considered good by the community. Communities that use Option enjoy an environment where it's profitable for companies to do what's considered good by the community. That alternative framing of a system of incentives wherein it's only profitable for companies to do good is, I think, also a good one. But I avoided it here because it sounds a little grandiose. So it's like I was trying to kind of keep expectations realistic. Not lose people on the first sentence. So, and actually, that was a challenge that I ran into in this entire grant was the claims that Option makes about what's possible are audacious, and so I want to make ones that I'm pretty certain are able to pan out, and then I also want to make them in such a way that the people who are funding this feel like, they're funding kind of the lower bound of the claims of Option instead of the upper bound. Although, maybe another framing is that this is kind of a moonshot product, and that it's worth trying to fund something that has that makes this audacious of claims. So, what are those claims? For consumers, it is easy to choose products that are aligned with their personal values and beliefs, and it's easy to express personal values in a way that will change companies' behaviors. So there's a simple mechanism that's in Option that enables those things to happen, and it can change from community to community. For companies and entrepreneurs, it's easy to identify which socially responsible action would be beneficial to take. So for their local community, what does the local community need? And originally, this line said that it makes it makes it so that companies can be socially responsible while only pursuing profit. And so that's kind of the heart of the idea behind option. And really what we mean by externality pricing is make it so that every time you do the most profitable thing, it's also the most good thing. And kind of not to get too lost, only a couple lines into this grant, but the core idea here is that companies are really not good at evaluating what the most beneficial, socially responsible thing is. They're really good at evaluating profit and loss. And so option says, great, let's let companies do what companies are good at. Let them evaluate profit and loss. And then let's set up an economic system so that only good things are profitable. So this is in disagreement with the idea of like a B Corp, if you've ever heard of that. A B Corp says, companies should care about their stakeholders as well as their stockholders. So the entirety of their community. And I agree with the thesis behind this. I just don't agree with the mechanism or the implementation. We want to have companies that are beneficial to their communities. It's just that how are they supposed to know, right? It's really difficult to know. And so what a profit motive does, which is really great, is it gives instant feedback on what's working and what's not working. And companies know how to respond to that. And so don't ask the company to change, although, change will be required, but instead ask the economic landscape to change. So I'm feeling like I'm not doing a great job of expressing that idea, but hopefully some component of it is coming across. And another component of this, which is just the other side of the coin, is it's easy to earn revenue for social goods that otherwise would require grants to support. So this is the idea of like there's pretty good evidence that social work is really beneficial for communities, and there's also evidence that certain kinds of policing are really beneficial for communities, but both of those are kinds of things that need to have some source of revenue to do, and it depends on the community, and it depends. So in other words, option offers a way to localize the kinds of interventions that are beneficial, and then instantaneously offer funding for those things. And the mechanisms that bring that about are, in my opinion, beautiful. Unfortunately, this doc is not going to, or this grant is not going to take you through the depths of the mechanisms. I just thought that it was too much to try and walk through. And so there will be a white paper that follows this, which goes through it, although I also link further down to the two mechanism sets that you could take a look at if you're really curious how all this is working underneath. Okay, for researchers and journalists, it is easy to be a high integrity researcher or journalist. So this means that you don't feel the pressure to lie. You can pursue what seem like the biggest stories and the most likely sources of insight. And it's easy to find funding for exploring the most important open questions. It's actually by the, they're different mechanisms, but a similar mechanism here. And we might even talk about it at some point in this grant. For citizens, it's easy to influence policy in an area of interest. And so, let's say you're a big fan of UBI. There's a way for you to just say, you can put your money up in order to influence the collective decision so that UBI is tested either in small ways or in big ways, depending on how compelling your argument is. There's a whole measure of how compelling your argument is, which is kind of based on falsifiability or precariousness of your claims, coupled with how much money you're willing to put behind it. So either of those are sources of influence. And then on the flip side of that, it's easy to ignore politics without bad things happening. So, if you think about the average person and the stock market, most people have their money in index funds. They just kind of leave it there. They don't think about it too much. And the economy keeps churning, right? They do their job, and then once a year they look at their returns and they look at their taxes. That's not true for everybody. There's people who are really involved. But for the most part, like a better politics is a kind where you don't have to babysit it and it continues to work. And yet, of course, democracies are the kinds of things that require babysitting. And this offers an alternative based off of market dynamics. That's probably throwing red flags for you if you're familiar at all with markets and their distortions, and also the ways in which rich people can dominate the landscape. And my claim is that the mechanisms of option ensure that that is not the case here, that this is a capture-proof platform. And that is an audacious claim. I feel a little tightness because I can't make that claim with too much confidence, because we haven't gotten to run these simulations yet, and we haven't gotten to do the game theory. So this is based on kind of a like running the system in your head and being like, yeah, it seems like that works. And just as a gut check that this works, the core idea there is that you ensure that, so the world that we live in right now allows money to be turned into power, and then you can use your position of power to turn that back into money. And so the example I like to give is the 150 million or 150 billion oil subsidies 2022. Subsidies globally, fossil fuel subsidies were 5.9 trillion. Wow. I bring you along for this ride, or should I just go find it out 1 second? So this is a congressman calling for a review of fossil fuel subsidies recently. 35 billion over the next 10 years due to tax incentives. Tax incentives, 84 billion in the next 10 years for international fuel production. Last and first out gives them 7 billion a year. 76 billion. So I don't know if any of those are overlapping, but we're talking about somewhere on the order of at a minimum 84 billion up to, who knows how much, 150 billion or more in annual tax subsidies. And the problem is that if you have these major subsidies, then that additional revenue that comes in can easily be spent in order to get somebody back into a position of power, right? And through lobbying or through whatever other mechanisms you want, for example, through supporting the campaigns of the people who don't oppose you, right? And so there's this way in which money can be turned into power, and then that power can be converted right back into more money. And so this like self-referential loop can cause lock-in, right? Makes sense. And so the way that option solves this problem is allows you to turn money into power, but it doesn't allow you to turn power back into money. And so at least not without taking on additional risk, concomitant risk. And so the way that this is summed up is in this kind of abstract rule. And the rule is that persuasiveness is equal to precariousness. And that goes both ways, that precariousness is equal to persuasiveness. And so you just follow this kind of design decision throughout the whole process. You say, okay, at every moment that we're going to allow someone to be more persuasive, and persuasive is like my way of capturing the idea of like influence, power, all these other things, which already have kind of connotations. And, you know, when you say power, you really mean like how many ships are in how many naval ships do you have in the ocean? So I'm kind of trying to pick a word that doesn't have those connotations. Persuasiveness is what I chose. And your persuasiveness is just your ability to influence the system to kind of listen to you, right? The collective belief to listen to you. And so you get to do that more when you take on more risk. And you'll see two ways that you can take on risk as we go through here. But the summary of those two ways is either you can take more money that you have and you can put it at risk. So this is directly purchasing influence with money. And the other way is you can make more precarious predictions. So predictions that are less likely to come true if you aren't correct about your assumptions. And this is very scientific in nature. Einstein's predictions of general relativity included the curvature of light around the sun, and then through a handful of experiments that followed, in the middle of an eclipse, it was possible to measure or to see a star that shouldn't have been visible at that point. That it was known that the star was, behind the sun. The only way that can happen is because of curvature, and so Einstein's precarious prediction here was what gave quite a bit of persuasion for the rest of the community to listen to him. And so something exactly equivalent here happens. It's encoded into the underlying mechanisms. And that's how we can avoid it being that only money gets you influence. The reason that, why not try and exclude money? Why not prevent money from being capable of influencing the system? The reason to not try to do that is because money is exchangeable for anything. And so whatever it is, whatever metric it is that gives more persuasiveness, people will find out ways to game the system in order to achieve it by using money. And so instead of trying to banish money from the game of influence, persuasion, or politics, this tries to put guardrails on its usage and to make it transparent. And so, in this system, dark money, money that isn't tracked, that goes through super PACs, that sort of thing, is literally less effective than just directly putting the money into the system. Now, it comes with associated transparency requirements, but the reason that people use dark money is to accomplish their goals, and it's not all nefarious, right? It's just the way that things are, and so this just tries to make that easier to do. I'll probably end up telling a story about. We should probably keep going with the grant. We're not very far in. So maybe this is the point where I start reading a little bit more and not interrupting myself every sentence. So how does option work? Prediction markets for policy setting. Option is a prediction market for governance. Prediction markets have long been considered an effective way for groups to make more accurate collective inferences. The basic way that a traditional prediction market works is simple. Anyone can create a market. For example, it will rain on Thursday, and then other people can bet on that outcome. If the market maker says that it rained, then the people that bet yes get paid. Otherwise, the people that bet no get paid. Pretty simple. Due to the value of accurate predictions, many prediction markets have sprung up, such as Augur, Metaculus, Manifold Markets, among many others. Each of these platforms are excellent at aggregating information and incenting accurate predictions. However, they cannot be used for governance. This is because traditional prediction markets suffer from three shortcomings that prevent their usage as governance tools. So these three shortcomings are: one, moral hazard. Moral hazard is the ability to bet on a particular outcome. Moral hazard is the fact that the ability to bet on a particular outcome can create bad incentives. So, for example, in 2021, just last year, a man bet $50,000 that there would be a streaker at the Super Bowl, and then he put on a leotard and he became that streaker. That's a perfect example of moral hazard. When I saw it, I was like, oh my, this is great. And it ended up actually being that he didn't get paid out because he was smart enough to post about this on his Instagram, how clever he was for doing this. But if he hadn't have done that, then he would have gotten away. And moral hazard, there are many examples of moral hazard. Insurance deals with this a lot. This is actually a term from insurance, and it's when people, they buy, maybe they buy like fire insurance for their house, and then either because of increased negligence, because they have that insurance, or because of intentional arson, they end up claiming that fire insurance. So classic problem, and I'm claiming that Option has a way to get around the problem of moral hazard. It's pretty counterintuitive, as you'll see. The second one is hidden information. So since earning money is dependent on having special knowledge in markets, betting markets incent proprietary information and insider trading. So, good example of this is, let's say that I know that every Thursday at 4 p.m., that's when Goldman Sachs sells 100 shares of Amazon. Because of that, I'm going to have this little tiny edge, which says that, okay, when that moment comes along, because they're selling it, it's gonna drop the price. So what I should do is I should sell my Amazon shares just before then I should buy at 4 p.m. and then maybe I should sell on the other side. So having insider knowledge gives me that additional little edge. Traders supposedly call this alpha. And then once you have that alpha, you wouldn't want to give it away. You'd never want to tell anybody, hey, 4 p.m. Goldman Sachs sells all their shares. So this is an example of hidden information. There are many, many examples of hidden information, and it becomes a problem for governance because, well, tons of reasons, but at least one example is that supposedly right now there's a scandal going on with Nancy Pelosi making millions of dollars off of making very prescient bets on companies, either selling shares or buying shares, based on what she happens to know about what's going on in the legislative walls of the government. And so if she knows what's going on, then she can kind of decide, should I own this stock or should I not own this stock? And so that's another example where hidden information, that's hidden information and moral hazard working together. People owning shares of a company that they work at, something bad happens, they dump those shares. CEOs get in trouble for this all the time. So, and plus, what's interesting about what we don't really care about market stock prices. That's the reason that we have markets is not so that we can have stock prices. It's so that we can get these forms of aggregate information. And so we actually care about the underlying causal model and the information that constitutes a market more than we care about the ticker price. In theory, the ticker price is going to reflect those underlying causal models, but everybody has this incentive not to release their proprietary causal model. And how would the world work differently if everybody was overlaying their causal models. If we all, we're taking one another's maps of reality and comparing them, and what I'm claiming is that that's exactly what option does. Is it incents? When I say incent, I mean incentivizes, but I don't like the word incentivizes. It's too long. It incents revelation of hidden information. And then finally, policy impotence. So if a market offers a very accurate prediction, then there's nothing to ensure that policymakers will listen to it or interpret it correctly. So there have been instances of prediction markets that have been created in the past that in principle were to be used by policymakers to make decisions. But through a combination of problems, including moral hazard and hidden information, but also just due to the fact that you're not going to let a market tell you as a policymaker what to do. These prediction markets provided maybe some information, but ultimately they didn't dictate the decision that was made. And what I'm claiming with option is that there's a way to directly harness policy to the collective inference of everybody. So instead of putting it in the hands of one single person who gets to be the policymaker, or maybe like a committee of people, you can have this swarm of people that all contribute in varying ways. Okay, so those are the problems with existing prediction markets for their use in governance tools. I'm now ready to take a drink of water, and then we'll continue with options circumventing these shortcomings. Okay, onward. So option circumvents these shortcomings by taking away the opportunity for upside from an accurate trade. That should strike you as weird. In option, it's free to be right and it's expensive to be wrong. And this is super counterintuitive. Most people who think about betting markets view the fact that it's symmetrical as just not only standard, but as a feature, right? Why would I ever make a bet, people will say, if I'm not going to make some money off of it. This counterintuitive choice allows option to redress the shortcomings of prediction markets for use in governments. For example, this design choice solves certain kinds of moral hazard. If the man in the leotard had known the best that could have happened is he wouldn't lose $50,000, he never would have put on the leotard in the first place, right? He never would have made the bet in the first place. That's actually maybe what they should say. He never would have made the bet in the first place, because there's no reason to make this sort of bet if you're not going to make money off of it. Option automatically sets its policies based on the predictions of the market. So this is the whole idea here, is that just as I talked about before, what you're actually paying for in option, when you make a bet in option, you're actually paying to modify policy. So it's like this direct lobbying apparatus. Like to call it lobbying is even to undersell it. It's just you're directly paying to pull the levers of policy, and now you're actually in exchange for that, you're making these, as we'll talk about, you're making these predictions as to what's going to happen as a result of pulling those levers. And so if your predictions are wrong, then your position will erode and the lever will move back to its previous position. But if your predictions are right, then it will hold. And that's an intuitive way maybe to explain what's going on under the hood. So when a player bets, they don't expect to be paid for their accurate bets. Instead, option players make bets in exchange for shifting the market prediction and therefore shifting policy. This solves the policy impotence problem. Predictions in the market directly set policy. Some people have said like, yeah, but will anybody do it? And all I have to say to them is, well, will anybody rearrange the furniture in their living room? And of course they always say yes, because I'm like, well, but that costs them something, right? It costs them energy, costs them time, why would they ever do that? And I was like, well, maybe they like how it looks better afterwards. And that's my claim here, is that humans are habitat creators, and the policy landscape is part of our habitat. And so people will be willing to pay to shift around the furniture in their living room. Now, because there's no return for being right, we might actually expect that the cost to dramatically shift a policy is not as high as it is today. Right now, there are tons of barriers that are set up to prevent policy from being shifted too much. I mean, it can take decades for a big change to occur, but because you're directly paying for it, this might mean that even very small bets can have fairly large influence, just like a fairly low energy effort of moving your chairs around can really brighten up a room. So option is automatically setting its policies based on the predictions of the market. Since option doesn't have to pay out for accurate bets, it can instead use that money to pay for information that leads to resolution of a prediction. We've gotten rid of the fact that the money has to. We've given someone the option to put money into an account. They get this. In this case, they get a token back. That money can sit there, and then all of a sudden we have a choice. What do we do with the money that shows up in there? And what we can do is we can use that money to pay someone for resolving that prediction. So this is once again an example of that principle I told you about, which is that precariousness is equal to persuasiveness. That in exchange for you getting to shift a policy, you're directly setting up a bounty for someone to come along and be paid to tell you that you're wrong. So this is a continuation and an implementation of that principle. And so people rightly will be a little bit concerned about putting their money into one of these predictions, because they're like, I'm paying someone to help me find out that I'm wrong. But there's also a different frame to take on this, which is that you're paying someone to give you the service of finding out that you're wrong. And there's a category of people out there, which aspirationally includes me, that really do want to know where they are wrong. And that would be making bets on this sort of platform all the time if they could believe that they could find out the precise places where their predictions and their understanding of the world is incorrect. And they would be directly contributing to this enormous knowledge graph of understanding. So there is a category of person, and I think that actually it's a category that will continue to grow, who want to have this ethic of being interested in finding out the ways in which they're wrong. Okay. So next is these paying for information that leads to the resolution of a prediction. So this creates standing resolution bounties that indicate the most high value places where a player can provide information. And this solves the hidden information problem. Players are paid to provide information, right? If instead of the market allowing you to buy in low and then sell, or buy in high and sell and short, if instead what they were doing was being paid to provide the information, then they would be providing the information instead. And in some sense, a stock market is just a really low fidelity way to provide information, right? And we've traditionally used it because, I mean, it's wonderful, right? It has a single dimension for every single stock that you need to pay attention to. Is it going up or is it going down? I mean, you can argue that, futures kind of add to that dimensionality, but still those are kind of derivatives of this. They're literally called derivatives, but they are first, second, third order derivatives of these predictions of is it going to go up or is it going to go down? And what this is saying is instead of having somebody buy and sell, have them directly provide the information that helps to update the collective belief. And then this information can be built on by the next person who comes along. Which will dramatically increase the velocity of collective understanding. Just as in science, right? Just as in science, you publish your work so that other people can see it and build off of it. And we've created good enough systems of incentives there that allow people a reason to publish that information. So, it reminds me of that Veritasium video, if you've seen it, where the guy that figured out the quadratic equation for third powers, quintic equation, third powers, fourth powers, fifth powers, I can't remember. I think it was fifth degree, that he figured it out. But then he kept it, hidden, because at the time there was kind of a dueling ethic of mathematics. And so somebody could always come with a better proof and duel you for your position. And then if you lost your position, then you'd have to give it up. So you do all this work in secret and kind of build it up so that you felt secure in your position. And this had devastating effects on the incentive landscape, right? Because nobody wanted to publish their work, which meant that, society only progressed at the rate of people's deaths, right? When all of their posthumous work came out. And so we now have much better systems for incenting people. Now, now it's the publish or perish paradigm. And that has its own downsides. But it's better than everybody building up work in secret so that they can never lose their position. So standing resolution bounties. This solves hidden information. Players are paid for their information. So the details of the mechanism that power option are beyond the scope of this grant, as I said at the beginning. If you're interested, you'll find links at the end. However, it's worth being familiar with the two general mechanism sets that option uses. The first is the claim market, and the second is the semantic market. And these two are tessellated with one another in order to create option. The claim market's job is to encode beliefs as currency. It actually gives us many more things than this, but the four highlights that I wanted to offer here are sincere signaling of beliefs and values. So you won't have, sarcasm or deceit or false signaling. Those are all fine and even funny in the right context. When you're playing games, but they're not great for the public square for collective inference. And so sincere signals give us are just a huge benefit. Bribe resistant currency. That's really difficult to bribe somebody in this for reasons that I didn't cover, but are available. If you want to go and check out the claim market, I have a video there that talks about where that bribe resistance comes from. The core idea is that if you make a claim to shift policy, then you actually pay somebody with a fraction of that claim. And so if the claim is bullshit and the other person knows it's bullshit, in the same way maybe that if you are paid by, there's the Petrobras scandal a couple of years ago. This big oil company comes in and builds up this supposedly it was going to be a gas refinery, but they were actually siphoning off a bunch of money. If they had made claims that said something like the Petrobras project will be successful, then all the people that they were paying on their team would have been like, there's no way I'm accepting those tokens because I know that those are going to absolutely collapse. So it's difficult to bribe them, right? Even if you went to a politician, you said, "Hey, I'll pay you." If you're paying them out of this currency, which is kind of like stained, right? It's not the same color green. Then people will be like, unwilling to accept it and unmoved by your offers for bribes. And so this is the benefit of making it so that not every dollar in your wallet is worth the same amount. That might actually open more questions for you, more concerns than it does close them. But I encourage you to go and check out the claim market so you can see for yourself how all those little pieces fit together. Then there's targeted funding for research and journalism. That funding is allocated wherever there is disagreement. There is a type of negative money that is not debt. There's other things like autopoietic communities, communities that are kind of self-assembling, self-organizing, self-discovering. Those communities are values-based, but then thanks to their values and their beliefs, they become economic communities. It's kind of reflective of how the world is today, although in other ways it's not. There's also an incentive in there. None of this is said here. I'm just adding for your amusement. There's also incentive in there against disagreement. So there's this kind of like net tax on people being in disagreement with one another. It makes it difficult for them to transact between those disagreeing groups. And so what you would expect then is that disagreement gets as low as possible. If there's a net tax for disagreement, then everybody will try and find common ground that they all agree on. And it's of course important and healthy to disagree, but it's mostly important and healthy to disagree where there is real disagreement instead of disagreeing for purposes of signaling your political alliance, or for all the other kind of non-semantic ways that we use signaling. The semantic market. Speaking of semantic, the semantic market's job is to instantiate the game of collective inference, or the game for collective inference and policy setting. It relies heavily on the guarantees of the claim market. It gives us a surface to interlock claims, so you can create conditional predictions, increased influence on more testable predictions, a way to select unbiased judges for each prediction, and game theoretic policy setting. Of all of these, my favorite is this one, a way to select unbiased judges for each prediction, to resolve each prediction. It's really cool how the mechanisms that are here in the claim market interlock with the mechanisms that are in the semantic market in order to create this measure of ideological distance. And I think I talked about this somewhere in here. This natural metric for ideological distance that shows up. And so you can actually pick the people that are closest to the person who made, or the group that made the prediction, just via incentives. The people who are ideologically the closest to them are the ones that are also going to be judging against them. That the only move that they can make is to say that they were wrong. And so, and of course, this feels very natural, right? Because you and I are more likely to listen to those that are in our ideological camp than those that are outside of it. And so here's this kind of just this natural mechanism that preferentially picks people that are closer to you. And so this, should give rise to, my prediction is, once again, we haven't run the simulations, we haven't done the true mathematical exploration of it, but my prediction is that the net effect here is that we get more heterodox communities and we get more self-criticism, self-invalidation inside of our organizations, just kind of like as this latent or passive feature of using option. So let's look at a specific example of where regulation was used to try and solve a problem and how it would have looked different had option been used. Note that this doesn't try and tell you why this happens. It just describes the behavior. So we're not describing mechanisms here. We're just describing behavior. In 2013, New York City proposed a ban on sugary drinks larger than 16 fluid ounces. The argument by the Board of Health was that the limit would improve public health and it would make it easier for people to reduce their caloric intake. The argument against the ban was that it would be legal overreach and that it violated the personal autonomy of consumers. Had New York City citizens been able to use option, those who wanted to avoid unhealthy drinks would have experienced an increased price for the drinks, something like a tax. It actually rises from something very similar to that disagreement tax. So it's almost, it's either the same mechanism or pretty much the same mechanism. An increased price for the drinks, dissuading them from purchasing those unhealthy drinks. In exchange for this tax, Option's prediction that avoiding sugary drinks improves health outcomes would lower the effective healthcare costs of those who opted into the tax. So now, how does all of this happen? Well, once again, this is like the story that you tell instead of the mechanisms. And this is actually this actually has a third mechanism that's not the claim market or the semantic market. It uses them, but it's this mechanism set that allows you to. It's part of the pricing externalities, which is what we're about to talk about. But this arises naturally, and of course, it requires citizens to sign up for the platform. But it actually only requires citizens to sign up for the platform. You don't even need companies to necessarily sign up. As a second order effect of the system, soft drink providers like PepsiCo or Coca-Cola would find aggregate demand drop for the goods that are predicted to be unhealthy, incenting them to reduce the health implications of their product. So, to my knowledge, here's a way that they might do that. To my knowledge, diet sodas are actually much healthier. And there's been pretty good research on aspartame and other artificial sweeteners to show that they're really not detrimental. And so now, I'm not a health expert. Don't update your beliefs about aspartame based on that, but maybe you'd see a collective shift towards that. Now, of course, still, those are predictions, right? Those are health predictions. They're a series of claims. And so if you were the type of person that said, no, Connor, you're really wrong, aspartame is very bad for you, then you would probably like Option as a platform, because it would allow you to bet that either in generic ways or in very specific ways that aspartame is not healthy. So, and then it would create funding for people to go and do the research. And if you were correct, it would cost you nothing. In fact, you could still transact with that currency while it was like locked up in that claim. Okay. So in this way, Option maintains individual autonomy while localizing individual responsibility, using markets and preferences instead of legislative bodies. And once again, that's the whole idea, right? Is what if we were able to create a market to govern markets? Because what we know about markets is that they are extremely nimble, they're agile, and yet sometimes they go off the rails because they are just a little bit too nimble and agile. And so what if the boundaries that help to keep markets on the rails were also made themselves out of markets? Might we be able to create a market system that does a better job of keeping the system on the rails? Externalities. So what about situations where members of a community are harmed by the actions of a company that they don't buy from? For example, what if a mining operation leaches toxins into a nearby river, which harms a biodiverse ecosystem and degrades the health of locals? If those locals don't purchase products made from the mined minerals, they can't exert influence by boycotting the goods. So it would seem that they don't have the same market-based ability to minimize pollution as they did up here, right? Up here, they had this way that they could choose to be taxed on it, and then that created a net benefit for them in terms of their healthcare costs. But now we're saying, okay, this isn't a product that they're buying. We're imagining that they don't purchase any products made from the mined materials of this mining operation. And so there's nothing that they can do to directly influence the mining operation. And by the way, I've chosen some examples in here, like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, or a mining operation. Companies are not bad things. They're generally not filled with bad people. They are, I don't even think it's mostly incompetence. I think it's mostly incentive landscapes. You don't get mad at water for flowing downhill, right? And so when it ends up in the lake, you say, well, yeah, that's that's where most of the water goes. So this isn't meant to demonize anybody. I'm just choosing examples that will feel familiar. Maybe, I'll admit to kind of looking for ones that have a bit of a good narrative to them. But companies follow incentives, and so to get mad at them, it's that whole thing. Don't hate the player, hate the game. So this is the game to modify the game. Okay, so those familiar with economics will recognize that this is a classic example of a negative externality. This is the whole point of option, is to price externalities, a bad thing that doesn't have a cost associated with it. In this case, the locals and the ecosystem are harmed, but the mining operation doesn't pay for that. So they enjoy these artificially high profits. The mining company has socialized costs while privatizing gains. So the classic way to solve this is regulation, but we're going to talk about the shortcomings of regulation. One option to solve this problem is regulation. For example, the local government could say no more than 0.01 parts per million of arsenic in the water. Otherwise, we'll fine you $1 million. Something I didn't think about is whether or not arsenic is actually released by mining operations. Hopefully, you'll forgive the plot hole there. However, regulation has some well-known problems. One, regulation is often slow to respond, so markets outpace and outmaneuver the regulators. Regulation is often imprecise. It over or under regulates, stifling innovation or permitting great harm. Regulation is often non-dynamic. It doesn't update based on new knowledge. And regulators can become captured. The entities they should regulate find ways to influence the decision in their favor. All of these are important to unpack, although they probably are familiar to you. Slow regulation is classic. As soon as you close a loophole, people find a new one because there's lots of incentive to do that. Regulation is imprecise, so it over under regulates, stifling innovation and permitting great harm. Examples of stifling innovation could be things like the way that the FDA works. The famous example is the Moderna vaccine was available supposedly days after discovering the virus, the COVID-19, and yet took, I can't even remember how long it ended up taking, but months and months before a vaccine was available to the public. Even though it's probably the case that there were many people like me who would have been like, yeah, I'll try it. Let's see what happens. I mean, it's just my body, right? And so, I also rock climb, and the other, just recently I was climbing a mountain and definitely had a near-death experience, and that's just part of my life. And the near-death experience on the mountain didn't do anything to benefit anyone else, right? Whereas taking an experimental vaccine would have, and kind of would have been an adventure. So the FDA and its regulations on what can be released, even in the case of an emergency, even for people who might be willing to voluntarily take it, that stifled innovation. We know about, there's just lots of examples of how these strong regulations are stifling. At the same time, insufficient regulation is also problematic. So, the famous case of Purdue Pharma having these enormous financial incentives for doctors to prescribe more opioids resulted in the opioid crisis. And there's probably information that I don't know about this, so I can't speak with any expertise, but it seems like you shouldn't be able to pay someone to administer a extremely addictive drug when there's bad evidence or there's weak evidence that somebody really needs it. And you definitely seems like you shouldn't be able to pay them to do that. So there's examples of imprecise regulation. and slow regulation, right? Eventually, it caught up, market caught up, but at what cost? I think millions of lives. Regulation is often non-dynamic, so it doesn't update with new knowledge. This is, the regulatory trap that people are concerned about, is that once you pass a law, they rarely get unpassed. And so these laws kind of just accumulate. It's also an argument that people who are pro-market and kind of anti-regulation make a lot, is they say, well, we shouldn't pass the laws because if they end up being bad laws, we won't be good at finding out that they're bad laws. And so this is the regulatory ratchet, because the regulation doesn't offer a good way to update based off of new information, or it can take a really long time. And then, of course, regulatory capture is the classic place where the people that you were supposed to be regulating end up, occupying the board seats of the regulator. When the oil company runs the EPA stops doing as good of a job. When Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac end up getting captured, who are supposed to be certifying the quality of the bonds, end up getting captured by the companies that are selling the bonds. Well, they're always going to give them a good rating. When and I think that also happened at the Federal Reserve. They talked about the revolving door between working at the Federal Reserve and then eventually working at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or one of these other companies. So you wouldn't be mean to your future employer. And so because of all the sharing that happened in there is this effective capture, right? And once again, this is not to talk about this is not casting aspersions. Like, okay, errors are expensive and we should avoid them. And when they do happen, like, I'm grateful for good journalism that comes along and says, hey, that was fucked up. But in the as we think about how we want to go forward, this is just to point out ways that regulation can break. And what I'm claiming, once again, is that Option offers a at least capture resistant way. I'm tempted to say capture proof. Let's see how these experiments go. Let's see what we find out. But a capture resistant policy setting mechanism, and it's based on Coasian bargaining. So Coasian bargaining. Coasian bargaining has like this mixed reputation in the world of economics, and for good reason. It's a funny meme. We're gonna spend some time with it here. So, economic theory offers a clever alternative to regulation called Coasian bargaining. The idea is named after Ronald Coase, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for this and related ideas. What would Coase recommend to those people whose river is being polluted? Unfortunately, his recommendation is very unpalatable to most people. He would tell them to pay the mining operation to pollute less. The mining operation could agree to implement policies to reduce their pollution in exchange for the community paying them to offset the costs of implementing the policies. So, in some sense, this makes a lot of sense. If you've ever lived with roommates, and they come back really late at night and they stomp around in the kitchen and you're trying to sleep, then maybe you've had a conversation. You've said, "Hey, man, would you mind not stomping around when you come in?" And they say something like, "Oh, yeah, well, I do that because I work outside and I get a lot of mud on my shoes, and so this is my way of getting it off in the kitchen." I don't know. This is not nice, but you know what I mean. This is off the cuff example. I'm not going to give myself points for that one. And maybe the solution is you buy the mat for them to stomp on and you put it outside, so that they don't have to stomp around in the kitchen. The point is that you're willing to kind of, once you understand the model of why they're doing this thing, you're willing to find ways to make it work for both of you, even if it costs you a little something. You have to go and buy the mat, or maybe you still have to deal with them walking around the kitchen, but they're gonna still make a little bit of noise. So this is kind of Coasian bargaining is another word for compromise, just brought to the economic world and given a fancy name because that's what economists do. And then of course, Coasian bargaining works out perfectly as long as you don't try and use it in the real world. Because, as I say here, Coasian bargaining has proved rarely useful in practice, even apart from the fact that it feels bad to pay people who pollute to do less of it, and that it could create a net incentive to pollute more so that you can get paid to do less of it. Like, imagine if your roommate knew that by coming into the house and stomping every night, there's a possibility that you say, hey, could you stop? I'll pay you $30 to stop. And so now they're like, I wonder what other things I could do that would be annoying that I could get paid to stop doing. So that would be a problem. There are even more fundamental issues with Coasian bargaining, and here are some of them. One is, how can the community know how much it actually costs to reduce pollution? How will the community verify that the company is implementing the policies effectively? How do future generations pay for the benefit of a healthy ecosystem and community, given that they're not there right now, right? Future generations have this tendency to not pay for anything until they're born, which is just selfish of them. It's, these new generations and their inability to make their prenatal rent on time. So how do we deal with all these weaknesses? So some examples that are given here. Let's say that the community is willing to pay $2 million to reduce pollution by 15%. But the mining company says it costs us, they lie, they say it costs us $5 million to reduce pollution by 50%, when it really costs them only $2 million. So there could have been a deal, but the mining company has secret information. Remember, hidden knowledge from before. It costs $2 million a year to run the water quality tests, which confirm that the company is complying. So in other words, it's expensive to verify that they're doing what they say that they're doing. And so that additional expense completely overcomes the total price that the community is willing to pay. And future generations, when they're asked, say that looking back, they would have been willing to pay $50 million for a healthy community and ecosystem, not just $2 million, right? So the people today are going to pay for something, but it's actually future generations that are going to benefit the most, like when you sum up all their experiences, and yet they're not around to do that. And so how do we back propagate all of their preferences to the present is another way to ask this question. And so now you can see why Coasian bargaining is of limited application. It only works where there's no hidden information about costs. It's cheap and easy to validate performance, and the people who are affected by the negative externality are able to pay. By the way, it's not just for people who are not born yet. If you're an indigenous tribe living in Africa and then somebody wants to go and build an oil pipeline through your land, then you don't have many things to. You have a lifestyle which you love, but as part of that lifestyle, you don't tend to produce things that the oil company is willing to accept in exchange for not polluting all over you, right? And so there's Coasian bargaining also can't work there because you are an affected person, but you're not able to pay because you don't have the same currency that the oil company wants. So that is the problem with Coasian bargaining traditionally, and Coase's original paper, the problem of social cost, is great. I super encourage you to go and check it out. He gives 2 examples of it. What's really fun about his paper is that it actually doesn't have I don't think it has a single mathematical symbol unless you count numbers in there. Everything is just explained kind of like I'm explaining it here, is in words, which is really readable. And yet he proves this like deep theorem about what can happen. But of course, that theorem, he gives 2 examples. One is about a farmer who lives next to a rancher, and the rancher comes into the cows from the rancher end up trampling the farmer's crop. And so he goes through a handful of examples about how much are each of them willing to pay in order to solve the problem. The problem with Coasian bargaining is that it assumes transaction costs are zero. And so transaction costs can largely be summed up in these three categories here. Some people include other things like holdout costs, so the ability to not make a deal if you don't want to make a deal. This happens a lot in real estate, where somebody will hold out in a negotiation until in order to try and bid the price up because they have property rights. And there's another one, which actually I'm just going to look up right now because I can't remember what. So wealth effects was the other one that I was forgetting. Wealth effects are when, because you started with a lot, you are in a net better position forever. This is what wealth does. If you are born into a super well-to-do family, you're almost guaranteed to be well-to-do by the time you end your life. It's hard to lose a certain amount of money. Whereas if you're born extremely poor, it's pretty likely you'll continue to be extremely poor. So that's what a wealth effect is. I characterize wealth effects as just another violation of this precariousness is persuasiveness thing, that if you are in a non-precarious situation, then you should have less influence on the collective inference. And that's not measured based on you, it's measured based on the positions that you take in the semantic market. So Coase theorem, the last thing I'll say about it is that it tends to be used to argue on behalf of property rights. So this is used as the argument for property rights and why property rights are right. But I don't think that I think that property rights are a proposal for how to solve the problem, but probably they're not the end all solution. You can imagine other possible. If you've ever heard of a Harburger tax, Harburger tax is an example of a alternative to traditional property rights that probably results in more efficient, kind of Pareto optimal outcomes. Anyway, there you go. So that's Coase's theorem and Coasean bargaining. And now we're going to look at options version of Coasean bargaining. This is how option gets around these shortcomings of traditional Coasean bargaining. And it should be noted that even though this is named after Ronald Coase, he never actually believed that there were what he called zero transaction cost environments. So he didn't think that Coasean bargaining could solve all problems. He also thought that government intervention made sense. He even worked with, prior to writing The Problem of Social Cost, he worked with whatever the government agency is that handles telecom, like the airways, in order to set up a market to allocate ownership. He recommended a system of property rights to allocate ownership of the different bands, radio bands. So that's also a great paper. It's probably better than The Problem of Social Cost, the one that he wrote before it, if you want to go and check that out. So how does option get around this? So option uses a form of Coasean bargaining, but rather than pay the mining company to pollute less, option allows the community to put negative valued money into the mining operation's digital wallet. And then this forces, if this company is on option as a platform, that's its own question. Why would they ever join? But if they're on the platform, then they'll have a digital wallet, and negative money can be put into their digital wallet as a function of the community saying, hey, that's an externality, we don't like that. This forces the mining company to negotiate with the community. And the negotiation is done on platform. In exchange for this ability, the local community makes predictions, which they stake. They put money saying that their their claims are correct, that the mining company can dispute. So here's some examples of some things that the community might say. They might say it only costs $1 million to reduce pollution by 50%, not 5 million like you're claiming. Every year, the mining company leaches 500,000 liters of pollution into the river. And future generations, can be another prediction that they make, future generations, when asked, will be willing to pay $100 million for the healthier community and ecosystem they enjoy, thanks to the reduction in pollution. So this is actually, this last one is really cool, because if you're familiar at all with effective altruism and the, like Will McCaskill and how much should we pay attention to the future lives that will live on this planet and maybe other planets, those all require you to make these assumptions about what the future is going to look like, and then back propagate those assumptions to the present in order to decide how you're going to make your next move. And this gives this natural way to parameterize that claim, which is that you can make these claims or these predictions about what you'll encounter. And as we go forward through history, these predictions become options on the future, different ways that you can buy into the claims about what the future is going to look like. And so, the whole goal, all that externality pricing comes down to is back propagating future costs to the present in such a way that we don't actually have to pay the future costs, because we've paid a smaller price right now. And so these predictions are the way to do it. I want to talk about this here. So prediction is actually not the term that is used in the claim market and the semantic market. We call them claims. But because I framed this as a prediction market for governance, I wanted to stick with introducing this one primitive of prediction in case people weren't familiar with it. It's a familiar idea if you've heard of Robin Hanson's idea of futarchy. It's really similar to futarchy. Robin and I have our disagreements on whether his formulation of futarchy works or not. But he was generous enough to share some of his time with me and basically tell me that I was making absolutely no sense at all. And so, that's what, if you're wondering whether or not I am a esteemed researcher or a scientist or economist, I am not. I am like anti-esteemed, at least by Robin Hanson. I don't think he disliked me. I just think he was like, okay, man, thanks for taking up my time. He told me to come back with proofs. So I was like, okay, man, I'll come back with proofs. He's like, you have an equation here, but that equation doesn't, what does that equation mean? It's okay. I won't get into it. So futarchy is, this other, it's really prediction markets for governance, but it has all of the shortcomings that I talked about up above, and it also has this problem of judge selection. How do you pick a good judge? And like I talked about, you can use this idea of ideological distance in order to pick a judge. Although it's also the task of option and of this grant to explore how does judge selection work, which I'll talk about in just a second here. But what I was going to tell you about was that, prediction is not actually the primitive here. The primitive is a claim. And you might say, well, but isn't a claim less useful than a prediction? Because a prediction is specific, right? Whereas a claim is kind of generic. But the problem is actually that predictions are really easy. It's easy to make generic predictions. It's easy to make predictions that can never resolve. So it turns out that handling a prediction is almost equivalent to handling a claim. You can make a prediction that the sun will be green on Friday in this one femtosecond, as long as you're looking at it with your naked eye, and all of a sudden it's not a very useful prediction, right? Because how many people are going to be staring at the sun in that one femtosecond, and how do they actually prove that they were doing it? And then furthermore, you need to create these networks of predictions. So it's you're actually not just interested in one thing, you're interested in how all of the things interlace together. And so claims are about as useful as predictions, but claims can be what the semantic market does is it creates this incentive landscape where you're always incentivized if you'd like to have more influence and you're confident, because once again, it's free to be right, it's expensive to be wrong. So that means that you can make more and more and more predictions in order to kind of get leverage. It's like epistemic leverage in order to make claims about what you think is going to happen. And so you're making these statements about these narrower and narrower claims. And eventually, once a claim is narrow enough, right, once it's precarious enough, it's probably a prediction. So, once again, to go back to that idea of Einstein making the prediction about the curvature of light around the sun, thanks to the curvature of space-time, this is a claim, right? If you go out on this day and you make an observation, then you'll see a star that you shouldn't be able to see otherwise because it's directly behind the sun. And so that is a claim about what you will experience. A prediction is just a type of claim. So I avoided it because it would have required me to explain more about how the semantic market works, and hopefully this, maybe this video will help to clear up some of those ideas. So this isn't the end, by the way. It only costs us $1 million to reduce pollution by 50%, blah, blah, blah. They can make those moves. But then based on the expected future cost predicted by the local community, it's actually not the expected future cost predicted by the local community. It is, once again, more claims about the future cost. So I'm kind of substituting predictions for claims here again, trying to go for understandability instead of a full description. I don't know if that's the right move, but that's the choice I made. Kind of like consistency and simplicity, kind of like rounding off all the edges. Based on the expected future cost predicted by the local community, Option places a certain amount of negative money into the account of the mining operation. And that negative money it's possible to use negative money here because of how the claim market works. It's really cool. You should go check it out. It's negative money, but it is not debt. So Option places a certain amount of negative money into the account of the mining operation. But what happens if the local community overestimated the size of the future cost? Well, in that case, the mining company can respond. And of course, they have an incentive to respond with their own predictions. They have now this negative money in their account. They're like, that's bullshit. So now they can respond and make their own predictions. But of course, it's free for them to be right, and it is expensive for them to be wrong. And so they want to make the most accurate prediction that they possibly can in order to they're trying to balance how much can we reduce the amount of negative money in our account and how much can we afford to lose. So there's definitely some gamesmanship here, but if you've ever played like that iterated game while you were bored in class, where you draw 2 lines and then you go 2/3 of the way over to the other line, and then you go 2/3 of the way back, and you get 2/3 and 2/3 and 2/3, then eventually, you play this enough and you get to the middle. And so what Option is claiming is not that it is a zero transaction cost environment, but that it creates this environment where by playing this iterated game, the next best move for a player is always to be more accurate than they were on the previous round. So, and that's like the high level way that it solves the Coasian bargaining problem. So based on the future expected cost, place a certain amount of negative money, and then they respond. So if the local community overestimated the size of the future cost, then the mining company can respond with their own predictions, making lower predictions, which they also stake, right? Because we're trying to maintain precariousness as persuasiveness about the costs of their behavior. For example, it costs us $3 million to reduce pollution by 50%. So they've gone up from what they had here, but they've gone down from our theoretical example of what they said. They said here 5 million. Every year we only leach 100,000 liters of pollution into the river. By the way, I don't know anything about these units, so these units might be completely wrong. And future generations, when asked, will be willing to pay $10 million for the healthier community and ecosystem they enjoy, thanks to the reduction in pollution. So they're arguing that they're going to be willing to pay much less, not $100 million, but an order of magnitude less. By taking this action, the mining company reduces the amount of negative money Option places in their account. However, this isn't the end of the story. Not all the money that was bet by the mining company and the local community come into play. Oh, now I wrote this. I can't read it. Now all the money that was bet comes into play. And that money becomes a bounty, which can be paid to researchers and journalists for helping to refine the accuracy of their predictions. So they bet, one group bet X, the other group bet not X. And once again, because we have this thing where we don't pay people for being right, instead we pay people for doing the work to find out what's actually the case. Now suddenly we have this pool of funds that we can pay to research and journalists. So once again, it's one of these things where, and by the way, isn't this cool how the traditional way that research and journalists are supported is that they have some, Washington Post is owned by Bezos. Many research labs throughout the world receive funding from, companies that you wouldn't think you would necessarily like seem not to be very unbiased. And the way that they can kind of maintain a little bit of an influence on a slant on the information that they release is that those journalists and researchers know that their next hit, their next source of income is thanks to saying things that at least aren't going to get them to lose their funding. And so it's all, once again, it's not nefarious. Sometimes it's nefarious, but it makes sense. Like if this is the incentive environment that you exist within, then you should absolutely respond to the incentives that are in front of you because you have a family to take care of and you have a company to run. And so researchers and journalists can end up in these kind of traps where they know that if they publish a story, there's a possibility that they get fired. And there's a really good story of when 60 Minutes almost didn't publish the expose on, I think it was the tobacco, the health impacts of tobacco, because they were so worried about getting sued, and because and so like here they're in this incentive environment where they can't publish the truth, even though that's their job. So this creates a source of funding where you're always paid by the person who was wrong instead of the person who is right, the person who wants you to resolve in their direction. And it also, you don't know who you're going to be paid by. All you know is the amount of money that you can take, because, and this is all spelled out in the claim market, you know the amount that you can take because you know that one of them is going to pay you depending on who you resolve against. And now it's just your job to go and find out who are you going to resolve against. Even right now, I'm still kind of rounding off some of the details there, because there are specific ways that you can provide information that help to shift the collective decision. But I think it's a good enough summary that you can get the idea why this is really important. I mean, this is true. This is a true source of independent funding for research and journalism. But then there's this natural question, which is that how do these journalists and researchers get selected and paid? And the short answer is we don't know. However, it's totally worth saying here that about 9 months ago, I said something like, I published a claim market with some other people and said something like, how does relevance work? It's like, how does relevance work? And how do you actually resolve against somebody, and how do you make claims relate to one another? And what I said is, I don't know. And now I know. Now I know how that's what the semantic market became. It was originally called the claim market, or the causal market, in that document. And so I'll tell you when I don't know things. And this is an example, is that I'm not certain I understand completely how disverifier selection is going to work. Clearly, if you could bribe people who, did I introduce the term disverifier? Disverifier is a journalist or a researcher. It's just the general term, and they're called disverifiers because it's their job to go in and take a claim and say, no, that one's wrong. Not necessarily to resolve in favor of something, but to resolve against something. And this is all because, it's possible to detect error, but it's difficult to detect perfection. And so, like, are our theories of general relativity correct? Well, we know all the places where they don't have errors, right? And that's all that we can say, because maybe, we also would have said about Newtonian mechanics that they were correct in all the places where we didn't have errors. And it was only in the places where we did have errors that we had to be like, what the heck is going on here? And then we got special relativity and et cetera. So it's that, to say that there is such thing as correct maybe is even a mistake. There's not correct. There is the reduction of error through its detection. And so that's what we pay people to do. That's what good scientists do, is they detect error and then they find new framings for making sense of the source of that error. So that's what a disverifier is in this context. Not super married to the name, but I was calling them verifiers, and that felt wrong because it disagrees with my ontology. If we can imagine that, it's really important how you pick your journalists and researchers. But I kind of alluded before to the fact that if you accept the way that option works, if you accept my claims about how it works, then we have this bribe-resistant currency. And so you don't have to worry as much about bribery, although we can imagine that there are profitable bribery loops, perhaps. There's self-dealing or collusion that we need to be really careful about not allowing. But it's certainly much harder to bribe people within the system if they're using the system, if they're willing to be paid by the system. And then I also talked about that notion of ideological distance, and so it creates that natural incentive system where it's easy to find somebody who's ideologically close to some group, and that they naturally, this isn't engineered for, this isn't designed, this just pops out of the mechanisms, that naturally gives them an incentive to prefer to resolve against the people that they are in the in-group of. And to kind of ignore the people that they disagree with. For the most part, what we do these days is we shout at those that we disagree with. When we have a visceral disagreement with somebody, those are the people that we shout at because they're in our outgroup. What this would do is it would effectively make it moot or useless to criticize those who you aren't close with, right? It's kind of like the whole idea of like the first thing before you fix the world, clean your room kind of idea. I don't think that's original to Jordan Peterson, but I think he's been saying it a lot. This is not an endorsement of Jordan Peterson. Option offers this natural way to identify bias. It's a measure of ideological distance. Sincerity and accuracy can be well incented by staking mechanisms. We already know, how to do that. I'm not claiming it's easy per se, but in like identifying bias, super hard. Giving someone an incentive mechanism where they have a reason to be sincere, by comparison, much easier. And then what the semantic market induces is this mechanism for iterative deepening of predictions, actually of claims, which result in predictions, and is a mechanism for incenting precise and resolvable predictions. So finally, this work is worth funding, excuse me, even if optimal disverifier selection proves impossible. So it may be possible that the worst case performance of option is still marginally better than other existing governance processes. So for example, we might imagine that option lives up to the standards of some governance system that is not the real world legal system. Like let's walk before we run. Let's crawl before we walk. And so prior to it ever being used in like a real world situation, although it's like I'm intentionally designing for whatever the broadest possible use case, we could imagine instead that the first places that we use it in are things like governance of decentralized autonomous organizations. It's difficult for collectives to make decisions. Oftentimes they use voting. Voting is a terrible mechanism. Don't use voting anymore. Open science modeling could be another place to use this. I am, like I said at the top, I'm working with Digital Gaia on one of their on their incredible product, and it's doing something similar to what Option is doing. It's just doing it kind of in a different frame. Option is doing it in a game theoretic frame. They're doing it in an active inference and artificial intelligence frame. So, for example, in regenerative agriculture, you can imagine people making claims about what's going to help this field grow the fastest or the healthiest. Governance of content moderation on platforms like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or maybe their Web3 alternatives. These are huge money dumps for YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And for the most part, all they do is piss off the creators. And so, you might imagine that there is a way to use this tool to allow communities to self-moderate. So when you get flagged for a content violation on YouTube, or you get demonetized, instead of needing to go through their horrible, slow process, you use Option to make counterclaims about what's going on. And you're staking money, and so it's not free for you to make inaccurate claims. But this way, it's both. There's both an incentive for YouTube to be really accurate because it's costing them money to make these claims, and you have this kind of instantaneous way to redress the issues. In fact, you can invite anybody in to this process because it can be used in a decentralized manner. Then we have, this category of these bespoke Web3 incentive models that people are rolling out. Like T.xyz is one that I'm really excited about. Is by the people that made Brew. By the way, thank you for making Brew. I love Brew. Almost always. There's occasionally when issues, but you're building it for free, so I'm not going to complain too loudly. You should be paid more. In fact, I'll talk about that at point 5, but we're still on point 4. That the Web3 incentive models like T.xyz is supposed to be like it's Brew, but it has this funding model. But the mistake that many people make when they try and make open source software funding models is they say things like, well, we should pay people for the number of downloads that they get. We should pay people for the number of times. Downloads is the one that makes me laugh the most, right? As if that's not a gameable metric, as if you can't, get your package integrated into thousands of different things. And like the people who built FFmpeg probably, despite it being this incredibly valuable tool, have fewer downloads than you do because you just so happen to have this little like string stripper that is deployed in every single node. I think there's this example of Node had the maintainers of some super tiny package. I mean, it was like maybe it was like 50 lines of code got dropped from Node or got taken out of Node, or the maintainers yanked it and broke a bunch of people's builds. And so, but if they had been in this other model where downloads are what matter, then they would have been making huge money, even though they were contributing almost nothing, right? So what you actually have to evaluate, and it's very difficult, is you have to evaluate the counterfactual of the contribution. So what would have happened had it not been for this contribution? And that is a hard problem, super hard. It requires causal modeling, and originally it's what I was going to base the semantic market off of. That's why it was going to be called the causal market. But it turns out that the causal market is a subset. Causal reasoning is a subset of this system, that this claim making system. And so you can represent causal modeling using the language that's defined in the semantic market. And so we can have the best of both worlds without needing to assume, because somebody, said to me, this was actually Mike Elias said to me in a podcast, he was like, well, what about miracles? And causal modeling can't handle miracles. And, even though I might be non-theistic, that doesn't mean that I know that that miracles are not possible. So, and the goal here is to design this like moral Turing machine or governance Turing machine, which is sufficiently expressive that all possible ideas, value sets, beliefs are expressible, even if I might find them unbelievable or even repulsing. And so, they should be expressible. That doesn't mean that they should be the thing that comes to dominate the belief set, but it's up to us collectively is what should come to dominate the belief set. What do we want to believe and what do we want to value? And so that made me pivot pretty hard and be like, okay, we're not going to make this causal modeling based, because it eliminates the possibility of discovering things that we think right now are not possible for discovery. And so now the semantic market is based on it's based on enumerating ways that you can find out that you're wrong. And it ends up being actually pretty similar to what the causal modeling was going to look like. But I'm glad that Mike gave me that final nudge because I'm much happier with how this works now. So that's the idea of replacing. Wait, did I even say what the idea is? Replace. Oh, okay. So brew.xy or t.xyz has this an incentive model that they are trying to implement, and somebody needs to go in and review it, make sure it all makes sense. And how nice would it be for them if they could just say, okay, we're t.xyz, and we're just the community of people that like to build open source software, and we use option calls in order to option API calls in order to certify that people have made, how important have people's contributions been. And so other examples for ways that you could use option as a product is Gitcoin itself, which I'm applying for here. I'm trying to get your attention right now. If you made it this far, then you have to fund me, please. Civil resistance for Gitcoin would be like every time somebody makes a Gitcoin contribution, you just require them to make a claim, which says, how much are you willing to bet that you are a real person and not a duplicate with somebody else that's in the system? And then that it's free for them to be right. They can go and spend that money right away. And you might hear me say this a couple of times and like not believe it or not understand it, might not click, but the claim market allows you to put your money into a claim and then continue to spend that money. It's a really cool mechanism, and it's called entrusting. And so they can go and they can entrust. They can trust their own statement that they are a real person, and then that also creates funding if anyone wants to doubt it. But then it's not too draconian because the person who doubts it has to put a little bit of money up too. But it's free for them to be right. So anyway, you get the idea. You get how that's useful. Another example is for decentralized Yelp. I have a friend who's making decentralized Yelp. They're also making their own bespoke Web3 incentive model. I mean, who is reviewing all of these incentive models. Clearly nobody, because people buy Terra Luna. It's just like a disaster. And this is the Wild West, right? This is the Wild West. And this is the whole point of Option, is that we can finally have, if Option works the way that I hope it works, and I claim that it works, then and I could be wrong, and I'm interested in finding out that I'm wrong before we hit any level of scale. So if you have ideas for how I'm wrong, like, I want to know. I want to know yesterday so that I can start spending my energy on something else. There's we live kind of right now in the Wild West, where there's no governance, there's no legislative layer to all these Web3 projects, and we don't want the traditional legislative layer because of all the problems that we talked about, all the problems of regulation. And so this offers kind of an alternative. Well, it offers a real alternative to all of those, to what would traditionally be, like the letter to Congress saying, hey, blockchains are bad, right? Or blockchains can never be useful. And I agree with some version of that sentiment, which says something like blockchains are necessary but insufficient, in the same way that birds with hollow bones are, the hollow bones are necessary but insufficient for flight. You also need, like wings. And so I think that it's correct to be a critic about crypto, the crypto world, and I think it's also correct to think that there's a real there's something really exciting here. Hopefully this is one example of something that's exciting. But we're only going to create a good environment if we have sane a sane incentive environment, where it's not just entirely predominated by rug pulls and insane speculation and all of that hullabaloo. So, and people blowing up Lamborghinis to make NFTs. That's a dumb idea. That person blocked me on Twitter for saying this, but that's dumb. Also, the number of brilliant people that are like trying to make gaming NFTs accessible. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure I'm making enemies here more than I'm making friends. So to finish that Yelp example, the reviewer can make the claim this review was left by a real customer who was not paid to leave the review. And then that's all that they care about, right? So they're just trying to certify that, and maybe they're willing to spend a bunch of money on policing themselves, self-policing, in order to ensure that they have the highest quality review platform. And that could be a completely viable business model, something like Yelp or Google reviews, or Amazon reviews, but with real integrity. By the way, it's probably also about time to move away from the 5-star model. So if anybody would like to do that, that'd be great. We can do that anytime now. Finally, number 5, DAO certification and open source software funding by predictions. Like, this project has no vulnerabilities. This is the one I'm probably most excited about. I was talking earlier about all these DAOs, and they're like they all claim to be decentralized and whatever. And also software projects. OpenSSL had a vulnerability that was no. People's implementations of OpenSSL cause vulnerabilities at companies like Amazon and Netflix. These companies that you would expect not to make these sorts of mistakes, because of some of the silly ways that OpenSSL set up their parameters. It's kind of beyond the scope of what's worth exploring here, but what would be really cool about this is that you can have these high level claims about projects or about DAOs that say this project is decentralized, this project has no vulnerabilities, this project doesn't have any ways in which you can game the system, the Terra Luna thing. And as people, you have a reason to put a whole bunch of money into this. You don't lose that money. It just becomes part of this bounty. The community can collectively evaluate whether or not they trust it. And then and it creates funding for people to go and find real vulnerabilities if they can find any. And so you can imagine that if you have one of these bounties sit open for 6 months, and it's a lot of money, $10 million or whatever, then people are going to be like, wow, seems like they probably are pretty reliable. In the same way that, the Riemann hypothesis has sat open for, 160 years, I guess. But it has $1 million bounty. I mean, it must be a really hard problem to solve. Otherwise it would have been solved by now, right? So by doing something like this, it simultaneously offers information about the confidence of the developers in their work while providing bounties for people to do red teaming. Red teaming is when you get people to try and break systems. Pay them to break systems to find out how weak you actually are. Use of funds. We're almost done. My voice is almost gone. I'm sure you are gone. And I'm just going to finish this. This grant will fund 3 primary activities performed by the Decision Science and Control Lab, Dr. Philip Brown. Philip's a good person, or maybe his students, depending on how difficult it is to pay a university with crypto. We will focus on 3 main things, which is proving the game theoretic properties of the model. A lot of these are here below. I've also, of course, talked about a couple of them. Implementing the model in silico and characterizing its behaviors. So that's the simulation. And then we have a stretch goal of implementing option as an interactive game so that people can actually get a sense for what is it doing. Because I think that what's much more important than all the words that I've said here, all of the words that I've said here could be supplanted with a 5-minute experience in a game. My favorite exploration of game theory is by this guy, Nick Labs, maybe Nick something. He has a section on game theory, and it's this interactive game. I mean, it probably takes you 25 minutes to go through. It probably took him thousands of hours to build, and it is so amazing. I'll link to it in this Loom. If I release this as a video, then you'll just have to search for it. But it's really remarkable, and you can get all the ideas of game theory without needing to study the math, right? It just pops out to you because it's this experience instead of being a abstract thing. And so I'd really like to get to this point. We will get to this point pretty soon. Either way, I think these are a little bit, well, now that I think about it, like, these are important for me to sleep well at night, knowing that all the things that I'm saying to you are true, and knowing that I can kind of rest on the knowledge of my own claims being accurate. But implementing it as a game would probably give a better sense of what it's doing. So we should. I really want to do this. I really want to implement it as a game. If you want to help, if you have those skills, please let me know. I would love to pay you to do that, if I can afford you. Questions worth exploring. What's the Byzantine fault tolerance of the inference model? This is just a question of if you swap out, if you do have a certain percentage of your disverifiers captured, then can the system still perform? There's a lot of ways to test this, but this is important, right? This is what Bitcoin solves. This is what Ethereum is trying to solve with its staking model, which it claims it has solved with its staking model. Can we characterize the capacity for information aggregation? How do wealth effects like income inequality affect system behavior? How quickly can a poorly funded accurate predictor overcome a well-funded inaccurate incumbent? So this is kind of like wealth effects, but we just want to ensure that if you're right, then then you win, independent of how wealthy your opponents might be. And of course, there's like a related question here, which is how much capital does it actually? So how big of a difference can we make? The truly successful case is that the person with $5 can beat the billionaire, and I'll call that a win for sure. And then it's just a question of like moving the goalposts a little bit, changing the gradations of that, where maybe they're not a billionaire, maybe they only have $1 million. Does that hold? Maybe they're maybe they're not really inaccurate. Maybe they're just kind of inaccurate compared to you. And what does that change? Can option be framed as a version of a known game for easier analysis? For example, beauty contests. What happens if we allow pricing of positive externalities? Does that introduce risks of collusion? I really want to enable paying people. There's a natural mechanism that's just an extension of the negative, putting negative money into somebody's account. By the way, putting negative money into somebody's account is an example of a policy. That's just a way that we can talk about a policy. The system comes up with a policy which it understands, which says go and put negative money into Connor's account because he's polluting or whatever. And so just as you could do that with negative money, you can do it with positive money. And of course, the risk with positive money is that unlike negative money, so like if I pay you $10 and you give me a sandwich, then you know that I'm never going to overpay you. Luxury effects are a thing, but let's just kind of ignore that for a second and say that like you go down the street and you see a sandwich, you want to buy the sandwich, you want the sandwich at the lowest possible price, and there's no incentive for you to ever give too much money. But imagine instead you were making a claim that said like this is beneficial for me, this is a positive externality for me, and you're going to make that bet, but then you're going to put money into their account, but that money is newly printed money, newly minted money in exchange for the bet that you made that this is beneficial for you. You can imagine that a whole group of people might hang out with one another and make these bets saying, Connor was nice to me, and then Connor Prime says Connor Prime was nice to me, and so on, and so they all create this collusion circle where they've given themselves a whole bunch of money for making these claims. And in principle, this isn't something that creates issues, but in principle is never reality. So when theory meets reality, reality always wins. Let's at least ensure that in our games here, while we're still in simulation mode, that it passes the test. Is option capture proof? We've kind of talked about that. There's this more general problem of moral hazard, which is companies paying to retain policies that are profitable for them. It's probably actually a unique case of this issue of positive externality, just inverted in a certain way. I think that I feel pretty comfortable with this one. I think we're going to pass on this one. In what ways might this be exploited to leak private information? So private values or beliefs or transaction history, can modifications avoid that? I do think there's a way. I see a way to do this entire thing without leaking any information about transaction history or values or beliefs. Not from a cryptographic perspective, that's its own question, but from a systemic perspective, right? So does the system require that information to be leaked? And I think it can be avoided. I definitely think transaction history can be avoided. I think that private values and beliefs might be queryable, like vaguely, or like probabilistically. But there may also be ways around that. I don't know if this is actually an issue. This is kind of, because there's also an upside to everybody just kind of being like, everybody who's on option. The option is optional, right? So not everybody has to use this platform. The name is it's named option to remind us that it is optional and should remain optional. And in the moments, if ever it seems like it's not optional, work should be done to make it more optional. But Uh, private values and beliefs are the kinds of things that might be worth that. At least I would like to. Well, I don't know. It's worth exploring. Um, can cognitive biases distort the game theoretic prediction? For example, paying someone in a dubious claim induces sunk cost bias and doubling down. I mean, this is the whole question of, does behavioral economics debunk this whole game theoretic exploration? And that's why we're starting with the game theoretic exploration and the simulations, and that's not the end, because once we've done that, then there's making it into a game and using it as a game, embedding it into other games for use as governance in there, like low risk things, like maybe embedding it into open source Minecraft, letting people use it there, and then using it ourselves, dogfooding it ourselves. I'm part of the guild Super Synchronous, and this is something that we've been considering implementing once we have some better understanding of what it's like, and then we'll know how it feels. And ultimately, what matters is the experience and how it feels, not whether or not it passes game theoretic muster. Of course, that matters, but it's like blockchain, necessary but not sufficient. What are the expected psychosocial externalities of using option? So Twitter and Facebook incite outrage just as a function of their operation. And we want to know what the expected psychosocial externalities are. One potentially positive one here is that the semantic market gives you reward in exchange for practicing this mindset. It's what Julia Galef, whom I love, calls scout mindset. And scout mindset is just the practice of, really, it's doxastic openness. It's looking at your beliefs and saying, how might I be wrong? And that's directly what the semantic market encodes. Is you get more signal. It's called signal. This quantity that you care about that shifts policy. You get more signal for making more precarious statements. Those more precarious statements are more precarious only if you're making this iterative deepening is you saying, these are the ways in which I might find out that I'm wrong. And that's a cool psychosocial externality to export, is this social practice of saying, here's the list of ways that I could be wrong, and knowing that it's already true in the world. If you want to go and practice this, go and find somebody that you disagree with, and then say, hold on, let me just list all the ways I think I could be wrong, and you'll find that the entire trajectory of the conversation shifts, because they now know that, oh, you are amenable to changing your mind. So it's already true about the real world. We're not inventing anything magic here, but to encode that directly into a governance system has, to my knowledge, never been done. And so that's a cool one that I'm excited about. But we can get to this next one, which is that given that option creates funding as a function of disagreement, does this create a meta incentive for disverifiers to stoke disagreement? So just as our politicians today have this meta incentive to stoke disagreement because it's what gets them reelected, and it's all about them finding the right thing that everybody's going to be sufficiently pissed about that can get them into office. Does option have a meta incentive to stoke disagreement, to kind of hold on to those things that are going to ensure that they get reelected, to not solve certain problems because it allows more money to pile up, all those sorts of things. How does the magnitude of this incentive compare with the existing disagreement incentive of an elected government? Right. That's what can we compare it to? Because really, what we should be evaluating here is not the absolute value matters, but the marginal value matters more, which is to say that how this performs in comparison to the alternatives that we currently have is what matters. Doubtless, there's a future system that someone comes up with, which is way better than anything that I can come up with. But me and the people around me that have cobbled this thing together will look like we were playing with Stone Age tools, and that will be great one day in the future. And so, but for now, all we're evaluating against is this option for governance versus other options for governance. So this is an incredibly high-level overview of option and its purpose. If you'd like to learn more about the details of the mechanisms that underpin option, here are some good places to start. The claim market prototype, which I mentioned. This is a fully functioning toy implementation of the claim market, which is the token layer of option, and then the semantic market. So this deck overviews the mechanisms of the semantic market, which is the inference layer of option. Sorry, Loom is wondering whether I must have been here for a while. Loom is wondering whether after 2 hours of talking, I'm done yet. And you probably were wondering that too before you left an hour and a half ago. But no, I'm still here. You can't stop me. Finally, adoption plausibility. It's worth addressing the most common objection to option. This is by far the most common objection I get, which is that like, but what if people don't join the platform? Why would anybody join the platform? And so, why would you be on option if it makes it more expensive to purchase goods and less profitable to sell goods? Those are two things that actually happen in option. And it also opens up companies to an additional form of liability. They can be, I haven't introduced this term. Okay, I won't. They can have negative money put into their account. And so how will it ever get adopted if that's the case? And the short answer is that it's okay if it's not adopted by everybody. It's probably like really who we're targeting are these greenfield companies who want to be able to either signal or actually to live inside of an incentive landscape that is beneficial for their communities. And so, and those companies exist. Good people are the vast majority of people. And so, people like that, if they see that this is legitimately, for real, actually, credibly, a beneficial incentive environment to live within, then they'll go and live within it. Of course, it's important that it is, and it's important for me that it is. So if it's not, like, please don't use it, right? And let's kill it before it starts. But if it is, then people will use it because it will be a better environment to live in. For some people, if we figure out that positive, whether or not it's actually safe to allow for pricing positive externalities, then it could also be a source of revenue for certain companies. If you work on public goods that wouldn't otherwise be funded, then this could be a source of funding, and it comes out of those predictions. The prediction says it would be beneficial if, and if people largely agree that it would be beneficial if, then you can use that in order to back propagate into paying someone to do the if, right? Do the thing, do the expression that comes after the if. So that's the high level. The analogy here is that for companies, option fills the same niche as LEED certifications, Better Business Bureau grades, corporate social responsibility teams, and fair trade and organic product labels. They're signals of that a company uses to say that they're sincere in their claims. And option creates a measurable surface on which to demonstrate that sincerity. A company that practices ethical manufacturing, for example, might accept options currency and stake predictions on option in order to differentiate themselves from competitors that only purport to practice ethical manufacturing. So if you're H&M and you use and you have just gotten in trouble for, or maybe Nike, just as like some random examples, and you've gotten in trouble for using child labor, then maybe this is a way to say, hey, we've actually changed our act. And doubtless, some people will use it for that source of signal. Some consumers will reject transacting in non-option currencies, just as some people today refuse to purchase non-fair trade goods, or they are vegan or they're vegetarian, right? They have a set of values that they care about and they truly believe, and for both reasons of signal to their community, and also for reasons of for actual reasons of their values and beliefs, they will prefer to transact in a currency that certifies the alignment between the products that they purchase and the values that they hold. Other consumers will transact in option simply because it can save them money on certain products. So, for example, the health insurance savings thanks to the voluntary tax on soda. So, of course, there will be pragmatic people that just follow the incentive landscape. And then, and of course, you can see how this will be a loop. This is an incentive loop. As more companies get onto the platform, there's more choices for consumers, and as more consumers get on the platform, there are more companies. There are more consumers to buy your products, so more companies will join. Finally, for regulators and lawmakers, Option provides new mechanics for making regulations that are responsive to the research community. So this is an additional tool for regulators and lawmakers to use in order to listen to it's hard to answer the question, what is the most up-to-date scientific inference on this particular topic? What should we do? And this is a surface on which to do that, to tie policy directly to scientific inquiry, and to fund scientific inquiry at scale, especially in the places where we care about it the most. Because right now we don't have a way to do that. And if we've learned anything from COVID, we've learned that not only have we not done it well, but we seem to be committed to doing it poorly again. And so, in the long run, communities, nations, and planets with better foresight and a better ability to avoid negative externalities will outlast those that don't. And let's hope that we're among that former category. Hopefully, Option is an option to ensure that we are. And that's it. We've done it. We've gotten through all of this. It took absolutely no time at all, only 2 hours and 6 minutes. That's not what I was expecting, but that was fun. Now the question is what to do with this insanely long video. Maybe just release it and let people do whatever they want. But thanks for coming along with the ride. If you really have made it this far, then boy, send me an email, send me a tweet. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't believe. And thanks. Thanks for all your attention. Bye.